Hello everyone, my name is Rob Biddulph and my World Book Day book is called Charlie McGrew and the Horse That He Drew. Now, I have written and illustrated lots and lots of books, lots of different types of books. My very first book was this one, a picture book. It's called Blown Away, all about this penguin here and his kite and a very windy day. This is probably my most popular picture book. It's called Odd Dog Out, and it's all about this sausage dog here who doesn't fit in with all the other sausage dogs where she lives, so she has to go and find a place where she does fit in. But I've also written chapter books too. The Peanut Jones trilogy here, which I'm very, very proud of, which is all about this little girl who finds a magic pencil. But I was trying to think, why do I write the books that I write? And I wonder if there's like a theme that brings them all together. And I suppose the common thread that runs through most of my books is belonging. Okay, so finding your place in the world, being yourself, working out who yourself is, in the first place. And I think that's because, it took me a while to find my place in the world and work out who I was. And I think all of the best writing comes from the heart, so it comes from your own experience. So I think that's the common thread with my books. I kind of write about what I know. Now I wonder if you guys do the same when you're writing your stories. Do you? I bet you do. Whether you realise it or not, I bet you do. So listen guys, I hope you have a very happy World Book Day, and I will speak to you again very soon. Okay, what tips do I have for reading? Well, I don't know if you're anything like me, but the most difficult thing when it comes to reading is finding the time in the day to read. Because, we all lead very busy lives, don't we? I spend a lot of time writing and illustrating my books. And so it did get to a point when I just didn't have time to read. But then I discovered something that really, really helped me out. Audiobooks. So when I'm writing a story, I can't listen to anything at all. I just have to concentrate on the writing. But when I'm illustrating, I can listen to music, I can listen to podcasts, and crucially, I can listen to audiobooks. I don't know if you guys have ever tried listening to an audiobook, but it's a super exciting and fun way to consume stories. And the fact that I can do it while I'm working means I'm killing two birds with one stone. I'm finishing off my book, but I'm also reading a brand new story as well. So I love audiobooks. I also try and carve out just 5 or 10 minutes right at the end of the day when I'm lying in bed to read an actual physical book, which I really, really love to do. We don't have screens in our bedrooms, so that's a really good start. Turn off all screens. And do you know what? Drifting off to sleep reading a story is a really lovely way of having some fabulous dreams. Yes, quite often I wake up in the middle of the night with the book on my face like that because I've fallen asleep halfway through a chapter. But you know what? There are worse ways to fall asleep. So listen, I hope you enjoy reading. I hope you enjoy World Book Day, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye-bye. Now, where's my favourite place to read? Well, I'll tell you one place. On the train, on the tube. I find it so relaxing to read on the tube. Now I used to have a job in the middle of London, and I used to have to go in on the tube every single day. But then since I've been doing my books full time and I work here, which is in a little studio at the end of my garden, I don't get to go on the tube as often as I used to, and I really miss that time because I realised that's when I did most of my reading. There's something about the sound of the train on the tracks and the fact that you can't really get a phone signal, that kind of thing, and it really made me focus and read. And I really, really miss doing that every day. But whenever I have to get on a train to go into London or to go elsewhere to do my events around the country, I always get my book out and I read because I find it so relaxing and such an easy time to kind of focus on a really good book. So I think trains, they are my favourite place to read. The books that I usually read, I read a lot of children's books, partly because I get sent lots of children's books to read, I'm very lucky, but also because children's books are the best books, quite frankly. But this year, I think I am going to resolve to read more football programmes. The little programmes you get when you go to watch a football match. In particular, Arsenal football programmes, because Arsenal are my favourite team, and Arsenal are really good at football at the moment. I know lots of you are booing right now. I know lots of you are booing. But Arsenal are really good at football at the moment. So basically, when I say I want to read more Arsenal football programmes, what I really mean is I want to go to more Arsenal games. And while I'm at the games, I'll read the programmes, which basically is a list of the players that are playing. But still reading, right? So there you go. That's what I resolve to do more of this year. I wonder what you're going to read more of. Oh, exciting. Now, one of the best picture books that I've read in the last year is this one. It's called Layla, the Perfect Witch, and it's written and illustrated by Flavia Z. Drago. Now, I could have picked any of Flavia's books, to be honest. There's 3 books in this particular series. There's Gustavo the Shy Ghost, there's Vlad the Fabulous Vampire, and they're all just as good at each other. But I think this one is just about my favourite. So it's all about this little witch here called Layla, who comes from a long line of witchy bakers, and as such she's desperate to win the famous baking competition, the Magnificent Witchy Cake Off. Now, unfortunately, it turns out that she's a little bit of a disaster in the kitchen, but with the help of her friends and her family, she manages to overcome her problems, and along the way she learns a very important lesson, that it's the taking part that counts, not the winning. Now, I really love this story, but what stands out to me in all of Flavia's books actually are the illustrations, because they're just so full of detail. Look, there's just a random spread that I've picked. And I think, it's one of those books where there's multiple stories being told in the book. Okay, there's the main one that's being told by the text, but lots of other stories are being told just in the illustrations, and I really love that. So there's lots of starting points for other stories on every single page, and it reminds me of Richard Scarry in that way. He was one of my favourites when I was little. And also, Flavia is from Mexico, and I think that her cultural heritage really comes through in her illustrations, particularly in this series, because we know, like in Mexico, they celebrate the Day of the Dead, don't they? Which is a really joyful celebration of that families have for the members of the families that have passed away. And I think that's what really shines through in this book, these books, the kind of the joyfulness in these illustrations. She doesn't think of things like skeletons and ghosts as scary things, more of celebratory things. And I really love that. And these books are just so uplifting. So honestly, great starting points for lots of other lessons, I think, with these books. And I really recommend that you all check them out. Now then, one of the very best chapter books that I've read in the last year is this one. Now, this is a bit of a funny one because the book actually isn't called Bear is Back. It's called Finding Bear, and it's written by Hannah Gold. Now, we're very lucky, us authors, because sometimes we get sent early copies of other people's books to read before they've come out, and in this case, before the final cover is finished. So look, I got a little sneak preview, and I have to tell you, I love this book. It's actually a sequel to Hannah's first book, which was called The Last Bear, which came out a couple of years ago. You might have seen it, it won lots of awards, and it's all about this little girl called April who visits a place called Bear Island in Svalbard, where she meets a polar bear that she befriends and she calls Bear, and she has all sorts of adventures in the first book. But in this book, the second book, she heads back to Bear Island because she hears that a polar bear has been shot, and she is worried in case it's her bear, the polar bear that she met in the first book. So she heads back there and she sets off through the frozen tundra to find her friend. But when she does find him, she gets a lot more than she bargained for. Look. Can you see this little chap down here? A little baby polar bear. I know, cute. And look at that amazing illustration by Levi Pinfold. Now listen, I love these books. I really love these books. Hannah's writing is so evocative. It places you right in the heart of the ice and the cold. I read this book back in the summer when it was really hot, but I had to put a jumper on because I felt so chilly reading it, because her descriptions are just so brilliant. It's a real page turner, and also I think it's a really great starting point for lots of important conversations about things like global warming and wildlife conservation. So I think it would make a brilliant class read, actually. So yes, Finding Bear by Hannah Gold, definitely one of my books of the last year. One of my favourites is a bit of a classic. In fact, it's a total classic, and I'm slightly embarrassed that it's taken me this long to read it, because all of my children have read this when they were at primary school, and they would always tell me how good it was, but it's taken me until now to actually read it myself. And this book is called Kensuke's Kingdom, and it's by the great Michael Morpurgo. Now, it's all about this boy called Michael, whose parents take him on this amazing adventure, this round the world yacht trip. And about 10,000 miles into this yacht trip, the family's dog, Stella, who's on the trip with them, goes overboard, goes over the edge of the yacht. And so, of course, Michael jumps in to try and save the dog. But the yacht just sails away, so the two of them are left kind of stranded, and they end up washing up on this seemingly uninhabited island. But they soon learn that actually it's not uninhabited. There is a man who lives on this island, an old Japanese man whose name is Kensuke. And initially he kind of is a bit of a shadowy figure, but he appears every now and then to give them food and water when he learns that they can't really look after themselves. And eventually they kind of strike up this kind of unusual friendship. But when Michael tries to light a fire on the beach to attract passing ships, Kensuke is not happy about it, and we learn that actually he doesn't want anybody else to find this island. He's on this island on his own for a reason. He wanted to escape the war that his home country, Japan, is involved with America, or they were when he first went to the island. So he doesn't want anyone else to kind of ruin this paradise that he has. But listen, I don't really want to say too much more, because lots of really interesting things happen, and I will tell you that there is orangutans involved, which is very, very cool. But what I would say is that, you know, there are lots of castaway stories, aren't there? But I would say that this one is a classic for a reason. I loved it so much. I think what I loved most about it are the relationships, especially between Michael and Kensuke. It's so interesting. You know, my children were right. This book stays with you for a long time after you've read it. And I guess the main thing I take from it is the fact that two people can be friends without necessarily agreeing about everything. Which I think is really, really interesting, and also that forgiveness is very, very important. So there are lots of brilliant lessons to learn from this book, but apart from that, of course it's beautifully written, evocative, and as I say, it stays with you for a long time after you've read it. So if you were a bit like me and you kind of have missed out on this story, I suggest you put that right as soon as possible. So one of my very favourite books of the last year is this one. It's called Someone Just Like You, and it's written by Helen Doherty and illustrated by David Roberts. Now, essentially, this is a book all about kindness and all about empathy. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world where there's lots of people who don't get on with each other. The news is full of kind of like not very nice stories at the moment. But this book, I think, reminds us that actually all of us human beings have much more in common with each other than we think. You know, there is more that unites us than divides us, which I think is a very, very important message. It's a lovely, lovely story. It's a brilliant rhyming text by Helen, but what I really love is the design and the look and the illustrations in this book. For a start, look at the brightness of that pink and that orange. I don't know if you're getting it quite by looking at it on your screen, but the pinks and the oranges are so bright. They're like fluorescent inks. And David Roberts, who did the drawings, I think he's he's definitely one of my favourite illustrators out there today. But his character design is fabulous, and this book is full of children from all backgrounds, different ethnicities, different cultures, children of all shapes and sizes, some with visible disabilities. And I think that sheer wealth of different characters that appear in this book means that everybody reading it will be able to spot themselves somewhere in this book, which again I think is a really brilliant thing. So listen guys, do yourselves a favour and get a copy of this book as soon as you can and read it, because I promise you will love it. This one by the great Oliver Jeffers is called Begin Again. And I guess you'd call it a children's book, but it's a very unusual children's book. In this book, Oliver takes us right back to the dawn of time, and we have a little look at at our journey on this planet, and by our, I mean humankind. So we go on a kind of whistle-stop tour of our evolution, so from when we first left the oceans, to when we discovered fire, that we can make fire, to when we started producing our own art, right through to when we started deciding that some parts of the planet were ours and other parts were theirs, and we started to draw these kind of imaginary lines and start to fight each other. So in this book, Oliver explores some of the very big questions that we have as people. So do you see what I mean about it being a very unusual children's book? But what's brilliant about it, I think, are the questions that it asks about what we should do going forward. Honestly, by the time I'd finished reading this book, my brain was absolutely fizzing. There's so many starting points for discussion, so many things to think about, and it's all delivered with Oliver's. Let's just open a random page here. So There we go. All delivered with Oliver's sort of trademark style, his sort of warm humour, his very distinctive artwork, and it really, really makes you think about what it is to be human and what we can do to best preserve this planet that we're all currently playing on. So a really, really amazing book, very unusual book, but I really, really recommend that everybody checks this one out.